I never thought I'd be standing in my childhood kitchen at 26, holding my phone with trembling hands, staring at a video that would change everything. The notification had come from our home security system while I was at work. Just a simple motion alert from the backyard. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me open it. The timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. Mom was at her book club. Dad was supposedly at the office. My younger brother Jake should have been at his college classes. The house should have been empty, except for Muffin, our 8-year-old Golden Retriever who had been part of our family since I was 18. What I saw made my stomach drop. Jake was in the backyard, and he wasn't alone. 3 of his friends were with him, and they had Muffin cornered near the garden shed. I watched in horror as Jake picked up the garden hose and aimed it directly at Muffin's face. The water pressure was on full blast. Muffin was trying to get away, whimpering. But Jake's friends had formed a circle around her. "Come on, it's just water." I could hear Jake laughing through my phone speaker. "Don't be such a baby." But it wasn't just water. Even through the small screen, I could see Muffin was terrified. She was shaking, trying to hide behind a lawn chair. But every time she moved, they moved with her. Jake kept the hose trained on her face, forcing her to breathe through the stream. His friends were recording with their phones, laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Then Jake did something that made me physically sick. He grabbed Muffin by her collar and dragged her to the center of the yard. She was struggling, her paws slipping on the wet grass. Jake picked up something from the ground. I couldn't quite see what it was, and threw it at her. Hard. Muffin yelped and cowered. "Stop being dramatic!" Jake's voice carried clearly through the security audio. "It's not even that hard." I was sitting in my car in the office parking lot, and I realized I was crying. This wasn't the first time, was it? This was just the first time I'd seen it. Suddenly, so many things started making sense. Why Muffin had been acting strange lately, more skittish around Jake. Why she sometimes flinched when people reached for her too quickly. Why she'd started having accidents in the house, something she hadn't done since she was a puppy. Why she'd been hiding in my old bedroom whenever Jake's friends came over. Mom had mentioned it to Dad just last week. "I think Muffin might be getting sick," she'd said over dinner. "She's been acting so weird lately. Maybe we should take her to the vet." Dad had waved it off. "She's just getting old. Dogs get weird when they get old." But Jake had been sitting right there at the dinner table, saying nothing. He knew exactly why Muffin was acting different. He was the reason why. I saved the video to my phone and started driving home. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to pull over twice to calm down. By the time I got to our house, Jake's friends were gone and he was inside, probably playing video games in his room like nothing had happened. Muffin was nowhere to be seen. I found her eventually, hiding under the stairs in the basement. She was still damp from the hose, shivering despite the warm afternoon. When she saw me, she crawled toward me on her belly, like she was apologizing for something. "Oh, Muffin," I whispered, kneeling down to pet her. She flinched at first, then seemed to remember it was me. "I'm so sorry, girl. I'm so sorry." I checked her over carefully. No obvious injuries, but there was a red mark on her side where something had hit her. She was breathing fast, the way dogs do when they're stressed. Her beautiful golden coat was matted and dirty. I heard footsteps upstairs. Jake, probably getting a snack from the kitchen, acting like nothing had happened, acting like he hadn't just spent his afternoon terrorizing a defenseless animal for entertainment. That's when something shifted inside me. A coldness I'd never felt before. A clarity that cut through all the excuses and family loyalty I'd been raised with. Jake wasn't just my annoying little brother anymore. He was someone who hurt things that couldn't fight back, someone who enjoyed it. And our parents had no idea. I sat there on the basement floor with Muffin trembling in my arms, and I made a decision. This wasn't going to continue. Whatever it took, however I had to do it, this was going to stop. Jake thought no one was watching, thought no one cared enough about just a dog to interfere. He was about to learn how wrong he was, but I couldn't just march upstairs and confront him. Jake had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in Mom and Dad's eyes. He was their miracle baby, born when they thought they couldn't have more children. He was the star athlete, the charming one, the one who was going to make them proud with his business degree. If I told them what I'd seen, they'd find ways to explain it away. Boys will be boys. He didn't mean it. You're being too sensitive. Muffin is fine, isn't she? No. If I was going to make this stop, I needed proof they couldn't ignore. I needed a plan. I carried Muffin upstairs to my old bedroom and closed the door. She curled up on my bed, still shaking. I sat next to her and opened my laptop. First, I created a new email account that couldn't be traced back to me. Then I started researching animal cruelty laws in our state, how to document abuse, what constituted evidence that would hold up if this ever went to court. I wasn't planning on sending my brother to jail, but I needed him to know that I could. Over the next few days, I started paying attention in ways I never had before. I noticed how Muffin's tail, which used to wag constantly, now stayed low most of the time. I noticed how she avoided the kitchen when Jake was eating, how she practically pressed herself against the walls when he walked by. I also started noticing things about Jake that I dismissed before. The casual way he accidentally stepped on Muffin's paws. How he'd pretend to kick at her when our parents weren't looking, making her flinch. How he thought it was funny to make sudden loud noises just to watch her jump. "Jake, don't do that," I said one evening when he clapped his hands loudly right behind Muffin's head. She yelped and ran to hide behind Dad's chair. "Do what?" Jake grinned. "I was just clapping. It's a free country." Mum looked up from her book. "What's wrong with Muffin? She's been so jumpy lately." "Maybe she needs anxiety medication," Dad suggested. "Some dogs develop phobias as they age." "Or maybe she's just finally showing her true nature," Jake said with a shrug. "Some dogs are just naturally neurotic." I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him. Instead, I excused myself and went to my room, where I wrote down everything I'd just witnessed. Date, time, what happened, who was present. I was building a file. The next morning, I repositioned our existing home security system to get better coverage of the areas where Muffin spent most of her time. We'd had the system for 2 years, but I'd never really paid attention to the indoor cameras. Now I adjusted the angles and enabled motion alerts for the living room and kitchen. I also started leaving my old phone hidden in different locations around the house when I left for work, set to record video. If anyone found it, I'd just say I'd been looking for it. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I was at work when I got a motion alert from our security system. This time, Jake was alone with Muffin in the living room. Our parents were both out. I watched him corner Muffin behind the couch, watched him grab her by the scruff of her neck and shake her. "Stop being such a crybaby," his voice came clearly through the camera's microphone. "God, you're pathetic." He was rougher this time, more aggressive. Muffin was whimpering, trying to get away, but Jake held her tight. Then he did something that made me drop my phone. He slapped her across the face, not playfully, not accidentally. A deliberate, hard slap that made Muffin cry out in pain and confusion. "That's what you get for pissing on my floor yesterday," Jake said, even though I knew for a fact that Muffin hadn't had an accident in weeks. "Maybe next time you'll remember to hold it." I was recording everything through the app on my phone. I had it. Clear video evidence of Jake deliberately hurting Muffin. Clear audio of him talking about punishing her for something she hadn't even done. This was it. This was what I needed. But as I sat there in my car outside the office building, watching my brother abuse our family dog through a tiny screen, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't new behavior for Jake. This was practiced. Casual. Like he'd done it 100 times before. How long had this been going on? How many times had Muffin suffered while I was away at work? While our parents were out? While everyone assumed she was safe in her own home? And more importantly, what else was Jake capable of? If he could hurt a gentle, loving animal without any remorse, what did that say about who he really was underneath the charming exterior our parents adored? I was about to find out. The evidence kept mounting. Over the next week, I installed cameras in 3 more rooms and started documenting everything I witnessed. Jake's cruelty wasn't random or impulsive. It was systematic, calculated, like he'd been practicing for years. On Tuesday, I watched him pour his leftover cereal milk into Muffin's water bowl while she wasn't looking. When she came to drink and backed away from the sour smell, he laughed and called her stupid for being picky. On Wednesday, he deliberately left the back gate unlatched after taking out the trash. Muffin could have wandered into the busy street behind our house, but luckily I caught it on camera and rushed home during my lunch break to secure it. But it was Thursday that changed everything. I was reviewing footage from the kitchen camera when I saw Jake preparing Muffin's dinner. Mum and Dad were at their weekly date night, and I was working late. Jake was alone with her, completely unaware he was being recorded. He opened Muffin's food like normal, but then he did something that made my hand shake. He took out his phone and scrolled to what looked like a video. He held the phone close to Muffin's bowl, watching whatever was on the screen, and started laughing. Then he reached into the cabinet and pulled out a small bottle of hot sauce. My heart pounded as I watched him squeeze a generous amount into Muffin's food and mix it in. Muffin was sitting patiently beside him, tail wagging slightly, trusting him completely. She had no idea what was coming. When Jake set the bowl down, Muffin approached it eagerly. She was always excited about dinner. The moment she took her first bite, she jerked back, pawing at her mouth. But she was hungry, so she tried again. This time she yelped and backed away completely, looking confused and hurt. "What's wrong, girl?" Jake said in a mock-concerned voice, loud enough for the camera to pick up. "Don't you like your dinner? Maybe you're just being dramatic again." Muffin looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, not understanding why the food that usually made her so happy was now causing her pain. She whimpered and approached the bowl one more time, desperately hungry. But the moment her tongue touched the food, she retreated again. Jake stood there recording her distress with his phone, laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. That's when I realized what I'd seen earlier. Jake had been watching videos of other people hurting animals. He wasn't just acting out on his own twisted impulses. He was learning from others, getting ideas, treating Muffin like his personal entertainment. I saved the video and drove straight home. By the time I got there, Jake had already cleaned up the bowl and was in his room playing video games. Muffin was hiding under the kitchen table, still pawing at her mouth occasionally. I gave her fresh water and some plain rice, the only thing I could think of that might help soothe her burning tongue. "Hey, Muffin," I whispered, kneeling beside her. "I'm so sorry, baby. This is going to stop. I promise you this is going to stop." She looked at me with those same trusting eyes, and I felt something break inside my chest. This innocent, gentle creature who had never hurt anyone was suffering because my brother was a monster, and no one else in our family had any idea. But I did, and I was going to do something about it. Friday morning, I called in sick to work. Instead, I drove to Dr. Martinez's veterinary office across town, where we'd never taken Muffin. I needed an objective professional opinion, and I couldn't risk our regular vet calling my parents with questions. I brought printed screenshots from the security cameras showing Muffin's recent behavior changes, the way she'd been flinching and hiding, the obvious signs of stress and anxiety. I also brought the videos, though I warned Dr. Martinez they were disturbing. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands. When she finished reviewing everything I'd shown her, her expression was grim. "This is clear evidence of systematic abuse," she said, looking up from her tablet. "The behavioral changes you've documented, combined with these videos, paint a very concerning picture. This dog is living in constant fear in her own home." "What can I do?" I asked. "My parents don't know. They think she's just getting old or anxious." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Legally, you could report this to animal control. But since you're not the legal owner, and given the family dynamics you've described, that might not get the results you want." She leaned forward. "However, there are other ways to protect her. You could document everything you've shown me in a formal report. Create an official record. Sometimes the threat of exposure is enough to stop this kind of behavior. And if it's not enough, then you escalate. but the key is making sure the abuser understands that their actions have consequences. People who hurt animals often do so because they think no one's watching or no one cares enough to stop them. I left her office with an official veterinary assessment documenting signs of abuse and stress in Muffin, along with Dr. Martinez's professional recommendations for her safety. It wasn't a legal document, but it was something official, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That evening, our family had dinner together for the first time in weeks. Mum had made her famous meatloaf, and everyone was in a good mood. Dad was telling stories from work, Mum was laughing, and Jake was being his usual charming self, making jokes and complimenting the food. I watched him the entire time. This person I'd shared a house with for years. This person who could switch between cruelty and charm like flipping a switch. How had I never noticed it before? How had none of us noticed? "Sarah, you're quiet tonight," Mom observed. "Everything okay at work?" "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, I wanted to talk to everyone about Muffin." Jake's fork paused halfway to his mouth for just a split second before he continued eating. But I caught it. "I've been worried about her lately," I continued. "She seems really anxious. I was thinking maybe we should take her to the vet for a checkup." "She was just at the vet 6 months ago," Dad said. "Dr. Peterson said she was fine. But her behavior has changed a lot since then. She's been hiding, flinching when people reach for her. I think something might be wrong." Mom looked concerned. "I've noticed that too. She's been so skittish lately." "Animals go through phases," Jake said casually, not looking up from his plate. "Maybe she's just going through some kind of dog midlife crisis." He laughed at his own joke, and Dad chuckled along. But I saw something else in Jake's expression, a wariness. He was watching me now, trying to figure out what I was really getting at. "I actually took her to see a different vet today," I said. "Just to get a second opinion." The kitchen went quiet. Jake's eyes met mine across the table, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real concern there. Not for Muffin, but for himself. "What did they say?" Mum asked. I pulled out Dr. Martinez's report and set it on the table. They said Muffin shows clear signs of chronic stress and fear. They think she might be experiencing some kind of trauma in her environment. Dad frowned and reached for the report. "Trauma? What kind of trauma?" Jake's face had gone pale, but he was trying to maintain his casual demeanor. "Vets always try to find problems. That's how they make money." "This wasn't about money," I said, still watching Jake. Dr. Martinez was very concerned. She said Muffin's behavior suggests she's been mistreated. "Mistreated?" Mum's voice rose. "That's impossible. We all love Muffin. Nobody in this family would ever hurt her." Jake pushed his chair back from the table. "This is ridiculous. Sarah's being paranoid. The dog is fine." But he wasn't fine. His hands were shaking slightly, and there was sweat on his forehead. He was scared, and we all knew it. "Actually," I said quietly, "I have something else to show you." I pulled out my phone and opened the video from Thursday night. Jake's face went white as he realized what I was about to play. "Sarah, don't," he said, but it was too late. The sound of Jake's laughter filled our quiet kitchen as we watched him poison Muffin's food and record her suffering. Mum gasped and covered her mouth. Dad's face went rigid with shock. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Jake was standing now, backing toward the door. "It was just a prank," he said desperately. "It wasn't that bad. She was fine afterward." Mum was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. "Jacob," she whispered, "how could you do that to her?" "She's just a dog," Jake snapped, and immediately I could see he regretted saying it. The mask was finally slipping. "I mean, I didn't mean to. It was just hot sauce. It didn't really hurt her." Dad stood up slowly, his face darker than I'd ever seen it. "Get out of my sight!" "Dad, wait. I said get out of my sight. Go to your room, now." Jake looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally, but found none. Even Mom, who had always defended him, was staring at him with horror and disappointment. As Jake disappeared upstairs, I felt Muffin's cold nose against my leg. She'd been hiding under the table during dinner, probably frightened by the raised voices. I reached down and stroked her head gently. "It's okay, girl." I whispered. It's all going to be okay now. But I was wrong. It wasn't going to be okay. At least not yet. An hour later, I heard Mum's footsteps on the stairs, followed by the soft murmur of voices from Jake's room. She was up there talking to him, probably trying to understand how her sweet baby boy could have done something so cruel. I could imagine the conversation. Jake explaining how it was just a harmless prank, how he didn't mean to really hurt Muffin, how sorry he was. Dad was in the living room, staring at the TV, but not really watching. Muffin had curled up next to his feet, something she never did anymore. She seemed to sense that the immediate danger had passed. I can't believe it, Dad said when I joined him on the couch. All this time, we thought she was just getting anxious or sick, and he was. He was torturing her for months, I said quietly. Maybe longer. Dad's jaw tightened. I don't understand how I raised a son who could do that. How did I miss it? I wanted to comfort him, but I was angry too. We'd all missed it. We'd all been so focused on Jake's charm and achievements that we'd ignored the signs. Even when Muffin's behavior changed dramatically, we'd looked for medical explanations rather than considering that someone in our own family might be hurting her. Mom came downstairs an hour later, her eyes red from crying. He says he's sorry, she announced. Like that, somehow fixed everything. He knows it was wrong. He's just been under a lot of stress with school and… Don't! I interrupted. Don't make excuses for him. I'm not making excuses, Mom said defensively. I'm trying to understand. This isn't like Jake. He's always been such a gentle boy. No, he hasn't, I said. And both my parents stared at me. He's always been charming. That's different from being gentle. I pulled out my phone and showed them the other videos I'd collected over the past week. Jake stepping on Muffin's paws, accidentally. Jake making sudden loud noises to startle her. Jake blocking her path to her water bowl just to watch her get confused and anxious. This isn't stress, I said as they watched in horrified silence. This is a pattern. This is who he is when he thinks no one's looking. Mom sank into her chair, her face pale. Dad just kept shaking his head, like he could somehow shake away the reality of what he was seeing. What do we do? Mum whispered. Before I could answer, Jake appeared in the doorway. His hair was messy, and his eyes were puffy, like he'd been crying. But there was something calculating in his expression that made my skin crawl. I want to apologize, he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound contrite. To all of you, and especially to Muffin. He walked slowly toward where Muffin was lying by Dad's feet. She immediately got up and moved behind the couch, her tail low. Jake's face flickered with something, annoyance, before he plastered the hurt expression back on. I know I messed up, he continued. I've been dealing with some stuff, and I took it out on her. That was wrong. I want to make it right. It was a good performance. If I hadn't seen the videos, if I didn't know what I knew, I might have believed him. Mom was already softening. I could see it in her face. How? I asked. How exactly do you plan to make it right? Jake met my eyes, and for just a second, I saw a flash of pure hatred there. Then it was gone, replaced by manufactured remorse. I'll take her to the vet, he said. Make sure she's okay. And I'll start walking her every day, feeding her, taking care of her. I'll prove that I can be better. No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. Sarah. Mum started, but I cut her off. He doesn't get to take care of her. He doesn't get access to her at all. Not after what he's done. Jake's mask slipped again, just slightly. She's not your dog, Sarah. She's the family dog. And you're not part of this family anymore, I said, standing up. Not as far as Muffin's concerned. The room went silent. Even I was surprised by the vehemence in my voice. But I meant every word. Jake had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no coming back from what he'd done. That's enough, Dad said quietly. Both of you. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Actually, I said, There's something else you all need to know. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder I'd created that morning. Inside were screenshots from Jake's social media accounts, posts I'd found after doing some deeper digging into his online activity. I looked into what Jake's been doing online, I said, clicking through the images. Look at these posts. The first screenshot showed Jake sharing a video titled "Funny Pet Fails" that was actually just clips of animals being hurt or scared. The second showed him commenting on a forum discussing creative ways to mess with pets. The third was a direct message thread where Jake was asking someone about testing pain tolerance in dogs. Mom gasped. Dad's face went white. But Jake just stood there, his composure finally cracking completely. "You went through my private messages," he snarled. "You had no right." "I had every right," I shot back. "You were planning to escalate. This wasn't just casual cruelty. You were researching ways to hurt her worse." The Jake standing in our living room now bore no resemblance to the charming golden boy who'd been making jokes at dinner just 2 hours earlier. His face was twisted with rage, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You've always been jealous of me. This is just you trying to turn everyone against me because you can't stand that I'm the favorite." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was it. This was who Jake really was underneath all the charm and manipulation. And now my parents were seeing it too. "Get out," Dad said suddenly. His voice was quiet, but there was steel in it. "Pack a bag and get out of my house. Tonight." "Dad, you can't be serious," Jake said, the manipulation creeping back into his voice. "I'm your son. I made a mistake, but..." "You tortured an innocent animal for entertainment," Dad said, standing up. "You researched ways to hurt her worse. That's not a mistake, that's who you are, and I won't have that in my house." Mum was crying again, but she didn't argue. She looked at Jake like she was seeing a stranger. "Fine," Jake said, his mask finally falling away completely. "But don't think this is over. You'll all realize you made a mistake, and when you come crawling back, don't expect me to forgive you." He stormed upstairs to pack, and I heard him slamming drawers and doors. Muffin had retreated to the corner, shaking. I went to sit beside her, and for the first time in weeks, she let me pet her without flinching. 20 minutes later, Jake came downstairs with a duffel bag. He paused in the doorway, looking at each of us in turn. "You're going to regret this," he said. "All of you." After he left, the house felt different. Lighter somehow, but also fragile. Like we were all afraid to breathe too hard in case the peace shattered. But I knew this wasn't the end. Jake wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. He'd be back, in some form or another. And when he came back, I needed to be ready. That's when I decided that protecting Muffin wasn't enough. Jake needed to face real consequences for what he'd done. Not just being kicked out of the house, but consequences that would follow him, that would make sure he never had the opportunity to hurt another defenseless animal. I looked down at Muffin, who was finally starting to relax against my leg, and made her a promise. "I'm going to make sure he pays for what he did to you," I whispered. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Jake Mitchell really is." It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted Jake's college and asked to speak with someone in student affairs about a serious incident involving animal cruelty. They transferred me to a counselor named Mrs. Chen, who listened as I explained the situation and offered to send her the documentation I'd gathered. "We take these matters very seriously," she said. "Animal cruelty can be an indicator of other concerning behaviors. We'll need to review this with our behavioral intervention team." Next, I called Jake's employer. He worked part-time at a local pet store, which seemed like the height of irony now. I spoke with the manager, a woman named Lisa, and explained that I had video evidence of my brother abusing animals. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Send me everything," she said finally. "I can't have someone like that working around animals." But my most important call was to Emma Rodriguez, a local news reporter who'd done several stories about animal welfare in our area. I'd seen her investigative pieces about puppy mills and neglected rescue dogs. She agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. Emma was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and an intensity that reminded me of myself when I was tracking down evidence against Jake. I spread out all my documentation on the small table between us, the videos, the veterinary report, screenshots of Jake's online activity. She watched the videos in silence, her expression growing darker with each clip. When she finished, she looked up at me with a mix of anger and professional interest. "This is solid evidence," she said. "But I have to ask, why come to me? Why not just handle this within your family?" "Because kicking him out of the house isn't enough," I said. "He's going to college. He works at a pet store. He has friends with their own pets. What's to stop him from doing this to other animals?" Emma nodded slowly. "You want to make sure this follows him. I want people to know who he really is behind the charming facade." She gathered up the papers. "Give me a week to put this together. I'll need to verify some details, maybe talk to your parents if they're willing." That evening, Mum and Dad were still adjusting to Jake's absence. The house felt different without his larger-than-life personality filling every room. Muffin was already more relaxed, sleeping in the living room instead of hiding under furniture. But I could see the toll this was taking on my parents, especially Mum. She kept checking her phone, probably hoping Jake would call to apologize again. She was cooking his favorite foods out of habit, then remembering he wasn't coming home for dinner. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked me while we were cleaning up after dinner. Dad was in his study, probably trying to distract himself with work. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "We protected Muffin. That's what mattered." "But he's our son, Sarah. Maybe if we got him some help, some counseling." I understood her conflict. She'd spent 21 years loving and defending Jake. It wasn't easy to accept that the person she'd raised was capable of systematic cruelty. "Mom," I said gently, "look at her." Muffin was lying on her favorite rug for the first time in months, completely relaxed. Her tail had been wagging more in the past 2 days than it had in weeks. "She's not afraid anymore," I continued. "That's how you know we did the right thing." 3 days later, Jake called. I answered because I wanted to hear what he had to say. "Sarah!" His voice was strained, almost panicked. "You need to fix this. The college called me in for a meeting, and my boss at the pet store fired me." "What did you do?" "I told people the truth," I said calmly. "You're ruining my life over a stupid dog." There it was again. Even now, even after everything, he still saw Muffin as less than, as disposable. "No, Jake, you ruined your own life when you decided to torture an innocent animal for fun." "It wasn't torture." "God, you're so dramatic." I never seriously hurt her. I thought about the terror in Muffin's eyes when she couldn't understand why her food was burning her mouth. I thought about the way she'd flinched every time Jake walked by. I thought about her hiding under the stairs, shaking and confused. "You're right," I said. "What you did was worse than hurting her physically. You broke her trust. You made her afraid in her own home. You traumatized her for your entertainment." The line was quiet for a moment. When Jake spoke again, his voice had changed. The panic was gone, replaced by something colder. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Perfect sister Sarah, saving the poor helpless dog. But you've always been jealous of me. This is just your excuse to try and destroy me." "I don't need to destroy you, Jake. You're doing that perfectly well yourself." "We'll see about that," he said, and hung up. His threat didn't scare me, but it did make me realize I needed to be prepared for whatever he might do next. Jake had never been someone who accepted defeat gracefully. I was right to be concerned. 2 days later, I found out what Jake's idea of retaliation looked like. I was at work when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Someone had tagged me in multiple social media posts, and people were messaging me asking if I was okay. I opened the first post and felt my stomach drop. Jake had written a long, detailed account of our family situation, but he'd completely flipped the narrative. According to his version, I was the one with serious mental health issues. He claimed I'd become obsessed with Muffin to an unhealthy degree, that I'd been living at home rent-free while my parents supported me, and that I'd fabricated the abuse allegations because I was jealous of his success. He'd posted it on multiple platforms, and it was getting shared and commented on by his friends and college classmates. People who didn't know me were calling me crazy, obsessive, jealous. Some were even suggesting that I was the one who'd been hurting Muffin and was trying to frame Jake. The worst part was how convincing he sounded. Jake had always been a gifted storyteller, and he knew exactly which details to include to make himself look like the victim. He mentioned that I still lived in my childhood bedroom, making it sound pathetic instead of practical. He talked about how worried our parents were about my fixation on the dog. He even posted old photos of us together, happy family moments that made his current situation look like a sudden, inexplicable betrayal. I sat in my car in the parking lot, scrolling through comment after comment from people who believed his story completely. My hands were shaking with rage, and something else, a creeping doubt. Was I obsessed? Had I gone too far? Then I thought about Muffin, probably sleeping peacefully in a sunny spot in the living room for the first time in months, and the doubt evaporated. Jake was good at manipulation, but I had something he didn't. I had the truth, and more importantly, I had proof. I called Emma Rodriguez. "I saw the posts," she said, before I could even explain why I was calling. This actually makes me more interested in the story. His response is so disproportionate and manipulative. It's exactly what I'd expect from someone who's been caught doing something inexcusable. "When will your story run?" I asked. "Tomorrow night. Are you ready for this? Once it airs, there's no taking it back." I thought about Jake's social media campaign, about the people calling me crazy, about the friends who might believe his version over mine. Then I thought about Muffin, and about all the other animals that might encounter Jake in the future. "I'm ready," I said. That evening, I sat my parents down and showed them Jake's posts. Dad's face went red with anger, but Mum just looked heartbroken. "I can't believe he'd lie like this," she said. "About us, about you, about everything." "This is who he really is," I said. "This is what he does when he doesn't get his way. He destroys people." Dad nodded grimly. "We should have seen it sooner." "None of us wanted to see it," I said. "He's very good at hiding his true nature." The next evening, Emma's story aired on the local news. She'd done an excellent job, presenting the facts clearly and letting the evidence speak for itself. The video of Jake poisoning Muffin's food was damning, and Emma had also spoken with Dr. Martinez, who provided professional context about animal abuse and its psychological implications. But the most powerful moment was when the camera showed Muffin before and after Jake's removal from the house. The contrast was stark. A fearful, anxious dog transformed into a relaxed, happy one in just a few days. Within an hour of the broadcast, Jake's social media posts started getting different kinds of comments. People who'd initially supported him were apologizing to me, saying they'd been deceived. His story began falling apart as people realized they'd been manipulated by someone who was skilled at playing the victim. My phone rang. It was Jake, and this time he wasn't trying to sound reasonable or charming. "You bitch," he snarled. "You destroyed me. I hope you're happy." "I didn't destroy you," I said calmly. "I just showed people who you really are. My life is over because of you. I can't show my face anywhere. People are calling me a monster. People are calling you what you are." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Jake spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, but somehow more threatening. "This isn't over, Sarah. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll find a way to make you pay for this." "No, Jake," I said. "It is over. And if you come anywhere near me, or Mum and Dad, or especially Muffin, I'll make sure everyone knows about that too." I hung up and blocked his number. Then I walked into the living room, where Muffin was sprawled on her back in a patch of evening sunlight, her legs in the air, completely relaxed and trusting. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. But peace never lasts as long as you think it will. 3 weeks after the news story aired, I was getting ready for work when I heard Mom scream from the kitchen. I ran downstairs to find her standing by the back door, her face pale with shock. "She's gone," Mum whispered. "Muffin's gone." My heart stopped. I pushed past her and looked out into our fenced backyard. The gate was standing wide open, and there was no sign of our golden retriever anywhere. "Did you let her out?" I asked. though I already knew the answer. Mum had been extra careful with Muffin since everything happened with Jake. I let her out for her morning business, just like always, Mum said, her voice shaking. But I only went inside for a minute to start the coffee. When I came back to call her in, she was just gone. Dad appeared in his bathrobe, drawn by the commotion. "What's wrong?" "Someone climbed the fence," I said, examining the gate. There were fresh scuff marks on the wooden fence posts and a small piece of fabric caught on the top rail. They opened it from the inside. I realized with sinking dread that we'd changed the locks on the house, but we'd never thought to secure the backyard differently. The fence was only 6 feet high, easy enough for someone athletic to climb. We spent the next hour searching the neighborhood, calling Muffin's name and asking neighbors if they'd seen her. But Golden Retrievers are friendly dogs, and Muffin had always been trusting. If someone called to her, she would have gone to them without hesitation. By noon, we'd contacted Animal Control, posted on neighborhood social media groups, and put up flyers with Muffin's photo. I kept thinking about how relaxed she'd become lately, how her tail had started wagging again, how she'd begun sleeping in sunny spots instead of hiding in corners. That afternoon, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Looking for something?" Jake's voice was casual, almost playful. My blood turned to ice. "Where is she?" "Who?" "Oh, you mean the dog." "Yeah, she's fine. For now." I gestured frantically to my parents, mouthing Jake and pointing to my phone. Dad immediately started toward his study, probably to call the police, but I held up a hand to stop him. I needed to handle this carefully. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to fix what you broke," Jake said. "I want you to call Emma Rodriguez and tell her you made it all up. I want you to post on social media that you lied about everything. I want my life back. And if I don't?" The pause stretched out long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. Then he spoke again, his voice different now, colder. "Well, let's just say Muffin might have an accident. Dogs run into traffic all the time, you know. Or maybe she'll eat something she shouldn't. These things happen." I closed my eyes, trying to think clearly through the rage and terror flooding my system. Jake had taken the one thing he knew would destroy me. The one innocent creature I'd fought so hard to protect. "I need proof. She's okay," I said. "Check your phone." A few seconds later, a photo came through. Muffin was sitting in what looked like a garage or basement, her leash tied to a metal post. She looked confused and scared, but unharmed. "You have 24 hours, Jake said. "Start with a social media post apologizing for your lies, then call the reporter. If you do exactly what I tell you, Muffin comes home safe. If you don't..." He didn't finish the threat. After he hung up, I sat in the kitchen with my parents, staring at the photo of Muffin. She looked so scared and confused. After everything she'd been through, after all the progress she'd made, Jake had traumatized her all over again. "We have to call the police," Dad said. "And tell them what?" I asked. "That my brother has our family dog? They'll say it's a civil matter. By the time they do anything, it might be too late." Mum was crying quietly. I should have been watching more carefully. I should have known he might try something like this. "This isn't your fault," I said. But my mind was racing. Jake thought he'd cornered me, thought he could force me to destroy my own credibility to save Muffin. And the terrible thing was, he was right. I would do it. I would say anything, ruin my own reputation, lie to everyone who'd believed me, if it meant keeping Muffin safe. But there had to be another way. I looked at the photo again, studying every detail. The concrete floor, the metal post, what looked like gardening equipment in the background. It was definitely a garage, but whose? Jake was staying with a friend from college since our parents kicked him out, but I doubted he'd risk involving someone else in a scheme like this. Then I remembered something. Jake's friend Tyler had mentioned during his senior year that his parents kept a spare key to their garage hidden under a fake rock near their garden. Tyler had used it to throw parties when his parents were out of town. "I think I know where she is," I said, grabbing my keys. "Sarah, wait," Dad called. "You can't go alone." But I was already heading for the door. I couldn't wait for backup, couldn't risk Jake panicking and doing something to hurt Muffin. Every minute she was with him was a minute too long. The drive to Tyler's parents' house felt like it took hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. I parked down the street and walked carefully around the back of the house. The detached garage was separate from the main building, set back behind a tall wooden fence. A for sale sign in the front yard explained why Jake felt safe using it. The house was empty. I could hear something inside, a soft whimpering sound that made my heart clench. The garage had a small window on the side facing away from the house. I stood on my tiptoes and peered inside. There was Muffin, tied to a workbench, pacing back and forth as far as the leash would allow. She looked panicked and exhausted. But Jake wasn't there. I found the fake rock where Tyler had said the key would be, pried it open, and unlocked the side door to the garage. "Muffin," I whispered as I stepped inside. "Hey girl, it's okay. I'm here." She whined and strained toward me, her tail wagging frantically. I could see that her water bowl was empty and there was no sign she'd been fed recently. Jake had been keeping her just comfortable enough to stay alive, but not comfortable enough to be happy. I untied her leash with shaking fingers, then pulled out my phone and started recording. I needed evidence of what Jake had done, proof that couldn't be explained away or dismissed. "This is Muffin," I said to the camera, panning around the garage to show the empty food and water bowls, the makeshift restraint system Jake had set up. "My brother Jake took her from our yard this morning and has been holding her here." As I spoke, I heard a car pulling into the driveway outside. My blood went cold. "Let's get out of here," I whispered to Muffin, but it was too late. The garage door was already starting to open. I quickly switched my phone to live stream mode and held it up, hoping the connection would work from inside the garage. If something happened to me, at least there would be a record. The door finished opening, and there stood Jake, backlit by the afternoon sun. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped into the garage, and I could see his expression clearly. He wasn't surprised to see me. In fact, he was smiling. "Right on time," he said, pulling his phone out of his pocket. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out." I realized with a sinking feeling that this had been his plan all along. He'd wanted me to find Muffin. He'd been counting on it. "You see," Jake continued, still smiling that cold smile, "when they find you and the dog dead in here together, it's going to look like a tragic murder-suicide. Poor, obsessed Sarah, so mentally unstable that she killed the family pet and then herself rather than face the consequences of her lies." I held Muffin tighter, my mind racing. Jake had his phone out, probably recording, creating evidence for his version of events. But he'd made one crucial mistake. "Actually, Jake," I said, pulling out my own phone, "when they find me here, they're going to have a very clear record of exactly what happened." I held up my phone, showing him that I'd been live streaming our entire conversation to my social media account. Everything he'd said, every threat he'd made was being broadcast in real time to anyone following my posts. Jake's face went white. "Turn that off." "No," I said, backing toward the window with Muffin. "Everyone can see what you really are now. There's no spinning this, no manipulating the narrative. This is you. Threatening to murder me and an innocent animal, all because you can't handle the consequences of your own actions." I could see people commenting on the live stream, dozens of them, telling me they were calling the police, that help was coming. Jake could see it too, and the confident mask finally slipped completely. "You ruined everything," he snarled, lunging toward me. But I was already at the window, pushing Muffin through to safety. As I climbed out after her, I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. By the time Jake made it outside, we were already running toward the street, toward the police cars that were pulling up to the house. I collapsed on the sidewalk, Muffin safe in my arms. As officers surrounded Jake, one of them approached me carefully. "Ma'am, are you hurt? We saw the live stream. We're okay," I said, my voice shaking with relief and exhaustion. "We're okay now." As they led Jake away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. The charming mask was completely gone now, replaced by pure hatred. "This isn't over," he shouted. But it was. Finally, it was over. 6 months later, I'm sitting in Dr. Martinez's office with Muffin, watching her tail wag as the vet examines her. It's a cautious wag, Not the exuberant full-body wiggle she used to have, but it's progress. Some scars take longer to heal than others. "She's doing really well," Dr. Martinez says, scratching behind Muffin's ears. "Her anxiety levels have decreased significantly since our last visit. The medication is helping, and honestly, time and consistency are the best medicine for trauma like this." I nod, feeling that familiar mix of relief and lingering anger. Muffin will never be exactly the same dog she was before Jake's abuse. She still flinches sometimes when people raise their voices, still prefers to sleep where she can see all the exits. But she's learning to trust again, learning that not every human hand means harm. The charges against Jake stuck. Kidnapping, animal cruelty, terroristic threats. His live-streamed confession had made it impossible for even the most expensive lawyer to spin the narrative in his favor. He pled guilty to avoid a trial, and the judge had been unimpressed with his attempts at remorse. But the real justice hadn't happened in a courtroom. It had happened in the court of public opinion. Emma Rodriguez had done a follow-up story about Jake's arrest, and the video of him threatening to murder me and Muffin had gone viral. Not internet-famous viral, but viral enough that anyone who searched his name would find it. His college had expelled him. His friends had distanced themselves. Even Tyler, whose garage he'd used to hold Muffin, had publicly denounced him and apologized for not realizing what Jake was planning. Jake's charm had always been his greatest weapon. His ability to make people see him as the victim, the misunderstood golden boy. But charm only works when people don't have video evidence of who you really are underneath the performance. 3 weeks ago, I'd heard through Mom that Jake had moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere his name wouldn't be recognized. But the internet doesn't forget, and neither do I. I have Google Alerts set up for his name, just in case. If he tries to get a job working with animals, or around children, or in any position where he might have power over something vulnerable, I'll be there to make sure the right people know exactly who they're dealing with. Some people might call that vindictive. I call it protective. "How are you doing?" Dr. Martinez asks me as we finish up the appointment. "I know this has been hard on you too." It has been. For weeks after Jake's arrest, I jumped every time my phone rang, expecting some new manipulation or threat. I'd installed security cameras around our house and changed all the locks. I'd slept with Muffin on my bed, both of us startling at every noise. But gradually, as the reality sank in that Jake was really gone, really facing consequences for once in his life, I'd started to relax, started to breathe again. "I'm getting better," I tell her honestly. "We both are." At home, Mom is in the garden with Muffin, both of them enjoying the afternoon sunshine. Mom had taken Jake's arrest harder than anyone, blaming herself for not seeing the signs sooner. She'd thrown herself into Muffin's recovery with almost obsessive dedication, as if spoiling the dog now could somehow make up for the months of suffering she'd failed to notice. "How did the vet visit go?" she asks, looking up from the flower bed she's weeding. "Good. Dr. Martinez thinks we can probably reduce her anxiety medications soon." Mum smiles, and for the first time in months, it reaches her eyes. "That's wonderful news." Dad appears from around the corner of the house, carrying a bag of mulch. He's been doing a lot of yard work lately, channeling his own guilt and anger into making our home more beautiful, more peaceful, as if creating something good could balance out what Jake had tried to destroy. We've all changed since this started. Mom is more protective now, more aware of the subtle signs of suffering. Dad is less trusting, more willing to see the darkness that can hide behind a charming smile. And me? I'm stronger than I used to be, but also more vigilant. I've learned that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we love, and that protecting the innocent sometimes means hurting those we care about. But I've also learned that I'm capable of more than I thought. I stood up to someone who had terrorized a defenseless animal. I exposed a manipulator who had fooled everyone around him for years. I saved Muffin's life and maybe prevented Jake from hurting other animals in the future. That evening, as we're all sitting in the living room watching TV, Muffin does something she hasn't done in over a year. She jumps up on the couch and curls up between me and Mom, her head resting on my lap, completely relaxed. "Look at that," Mom says softly, tears in her eyes. She's not scared anymore. I run my fingers through Muffin's golden fur, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing. She's not the same dog she was before Jake's abuse, The damage he did will always be part of her story. But she's learning to live with it, learning to trust again, learning that she's safe now. Just like all of us. My phone buzzes with a notification. Another Google alert for Jake's name. This time, it's a local news story from his new city. He'd applied for a job at an animal shelter, and someone had recognized his name, done a quick internet search, and found Emma's story. The shelter had immediately rejected his application and issued a statement about their zero-tolerance policy for animal abusers. I show the article to my parents. Dad nods grimly, but Mom looks troubled. Don't you think he's suffered enough? She asks quietly. Maybe he's learned from this. Maybe he's changed. I look down at Muffin, sleeping peacefully on my lap for the first time in months. I think about all the animals Jake might have hurt if I hadn't stopped him. I think about the pattern of escalation I'd seen in his online searches, the way he'd researched more extreme forms of cruelty. Some people can change, I say. But Jake only learned to be more careful about getting caught. The truth is, I don't know if Jake has really changed. Maybe prison has given him time to reflect, to understand the harm he's caused. Maybe he genuinely feels remorse for what he did to Muffin, to me, to our family. But it doesn't matter. My job was never to rehabilitate Jake or give him chances to prove he'd changed. My job was to protect Muffin and make sure Jake faced consequences for his actions. And I did that. The consequences follow him now, wherever he goes. Every job application, every attempt to rent an apartment, every time he tries to start a relationship with someone new, there's a chance they'll search his name and find the truth. He'll have to live with the knowledge that his mask has been permanently removed, that people can see exactly who he is underneath the charm. That's not cruelty. That's accountability. 3 hours later, as I'm getting ready for bed, I hear Muffin's nails clicking on the hardwood floor. She appears in my doorway, tail wagging tentatively. You want to sleep in here tonight? I ask her. She wags harder and jumps onto my bed, circling twice before settling down with a contented sigh. I turn off the lights and lie down next to her, listening to her quiet breathing in the darkness. For so long, Muffin had been afraid to sleep, always alert to the next threat. Now she's learning that nighttime can be peaceful, that she can close her eyes without fear of what might happen while she's vulnerable. We're both learning that, I realize. We're both learning to sleep soundly again. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet, except for the distant sound of wind through the trees. Our house is secure, our family is healing, and the person who hurt us can't reach us anymore. Muffin shifts beside me, her paw resting against my arm. In the morning, we'll go for a walk in the park. We'll visit the neighbors who helped search for her when Jake took her. We'll continue the slow, patient work of rebuilding trust and security. But tonight, for the first time in over a year, both Muffin and I are going to sleep without fear. And that feels like the kind of victory that matters most.